Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody who's joined us on Zoom. I would like to begin to wanted to introduce a theme for today's study. I hope that this theme will help us to remember the topic that we cover today. The theme for today is utopia. And I will explain the meaning of the word first. The word utopia is derived from Greek words. There are two spellings. Utopia with a U. The Greek prefix is OU. And the other spelling is from letters that look like this. But the English words are pronounced the same. The meaning of this one translates to no place. And this one, it means good place. But over time, these words have been combined and people use them interchangeably. If you take them together, you could make it a meaning such as this. A non-existent society where there is joy and happiness. It was coined a long time ago for the first time. It was in 1516. It was a book that was written in Latin called Utopia. I want to read the quote about this book. For the translators, it's quote number 1. It is, there is a famous book written in 1516. Its full title in Latin is A Truly Golden Little Book That's Both Beneficial and Enjoyable, which is about how things should operate in a state and about the new island called Utopia. It is a work of fiction and socio-political satire depicting a fictional island society and its religious, social, and political customs. It was a blueprint for an ideal society with minimal crime, violence, and poverty. So we're a movement and we're heading toward a utopia. And by the end of today's two presentations, I hope that we would have a better idea of what true utopia would look like. And how it differs from the kind of utopias being offered by others. So if utopia is an island, a beautiful, wonderful place, I imagine that if we were on a boat, it would be the place where we want to go. If we were to simplify movements in the world today, although there may be different ideas about utopia, we'll simplify it to the two streams that we see working in the left wing and the right wing. Humanity is moving forward, but they disagree about what a utopia would look like. But both think that they're heading to a good place and that the other side is taking us to a bad place. There are people who believe traditional families and social structures would be a very beautiful thing. But there are others who feel that equal opportunities for everyone would be the true utopia. And we know that in this movement, we align ourselves with the left wing or the liberal side. But we have also learned that there are problems on the left. We need to sift the left because they don't always understand racism. For example, we have seen that they have sometimes got problems with anti-Semitism. We know that they have not understood sexism correctly in many cases. Many times you can tell by the way they dress. And sometimes because they confuse an issue about sexism and confuse that with an issue about race, and will label things as far right, white supremacists. But when it's Proud Boys attending a pride rally, we know it's an issue about sexism. So that's part of what's wrong with the left. But there is more, because they are partially blind. They don't have the prophetic message. We could be reading the news on the right stream, the true stream of news, getting it from the right sources. And who are they telling us is our biggest threat today? What type of articles have you been reading that made you feel angry? And do you feel safe because you do not align with a moral majority type of thinking? In the left wing, have you seen any journalists warning you about Pope Francis? Are they telling you or Nethinims to be careful with Michael Moore? What is more dangerous? Is it something that is obviously bad? Or is it something that looks very similar to the truth? You won't get that warning from the news. You need the prophetic message to give you the other half of what you need. It's not only dangerous because it's similar to us. It is very dangerous because it is nearly ready for its work. Our prophetic message teaches us that the papacy will begin its work at Sunday law. And we are not fighting the old papacy. We'll be fighting a new and modernized and refreshed and restructured modern papacy. We know the papacy and we use the term the counterfeit. I will read a definition of the counterfeit for the translators. It's quote 2. Counterfeit is to forge, to copy or imitate without authority or right to do so, with the aim to deceive or defraud by passing the copy or things forged as that which is original or genuine. So who is the counterfeiter? That's Satan. Who is the original artist? That's God. And by creating a forgery, Satan is stealing from God. By cleverly trying to recreate a similar work that God is doing. The threat that we face, it looks very good, very nice. And for many of us, that is a very dangerous thing to think about. Our work begins at Sunday Law for the World. And we have become better and better in our methodology with practice over time. The early messages by Elder Jeff were making some observations about events. The message that came in 2012 was more specific and clear about time. And by the time we got to 2018, it was very clear both about time and the way it would look. It's not only us that has been improving with practice. Who else has been practicing counterfeiting God's work? Satan has been working on copying God for a long time. So I want to have a look at comparing our God's church with the counterfeit. And considering how much better the counterfeiting is in terms of speed and skill. We're looking at the speed and skill of the counterfeiting. If we pick a date, a general time where God had transitioned his church from a theocracy to the separation of church and state, we could choose 34 AD. The counterfeit of that, when Satan has separated church and state, we could place a date of around 538. It's a simple copy, about 500 years apart. Then we could look at the Millerite time period of 1798 to 1844. The alpha of our history. Without going into the study in depth now, we have other studies to show how closely Satan counterfeited this. (1798) lines up with 1899. 1844 lines up with 1945. The understanding of reform lines at that time was in terms of scatterings and gatherings. And that is what Satan counterfeited using the same model. We would also line up 1888 with 1989 history. Again, using this same type of work. And again, we have about 100 years difference, almost exactly 100 years. So Satan is learning the kind of things that work to tidy up the church and is copying it. I want to move into our own line now, starting with 1989. And the waymark that is lined up with this is 2001. We can see it's a lot closer in time. That's 12 years difference. This waymark, we place two reformers that will help take a group of people from a mess to ready for work. We have Elder Jeff as the first messenger, and Elder Paminda is marked in this history, though not so obviously. Jeff is the reformer. In the counterfeit, we have Joseph Ratzinger and George Bergoglio marked here. They will be the same people as Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. Ratzinger is not a pope yet, but he takes the position of trying to clean up the sexual abuse scandals in the church. He wants to clean up the church and prepare it for work. Bergoglio was marked here because he met with the St. Galen group. So he's not very visible yet, but he can be marked at this time of the end waymark for them. The next waymark we have was 2001, 9/11. And in some studies that were done, we marked the death of Saul here, the death of leadership. A transfer from the SDA conference to this movement. This lines up with 2005, the death of Pope John Paul II. And now we've got 4 years difference. When we get to 2012, the first reformer, the first messenger, rejects the message of time. This marks a failure for the first messenger. Now, in the counterfeits line, it is also 2012 that we mark failure for the first messenger. And now we have 0 years difference. And this failure here we mark as the scandal that was brought out in the Vati Leaks scandal. Evidence that the first reformer who intended to clean up the abuse scandal had failed to do so. So we have 500 years, 100 years, 12 years, 4 years, and 0. And now we are running, stepping on each other's toes. In 2014, we had a change of leadership, a prophetic change of leadership. Elder Jeff is ended here and it transfers to Elder Paminda. And we won't be talking about the role of Elder Tess in this study. In this equivalent one that we line up, we placed 2013. It's actually 1 year sooner. And the explanation for this fact is that Satan had accepted the message on time and was able to work out that a change of leadership would be required at this waymark. We had the retirement of Pope Benedict announced, which was a historic, very rare event. And he was replaced by Pope Francis, the second reformer. There were places that these first messages were not prepared to go, that a second messenger would be required to take the movements. During this time period, we saw that the first messengers did not step down or back away completely. In this history, in our movement, there were disciples of Jeff and there were disciples of Elder Paminda. Likewise, in the counterfeit, we had the disciples of Benedict and the disciples of Francis. These disciples were in conflict with each other. By the time we get to April 2019, there is a work of the first messenger to undermine the message of the second messenger. In the very same month, we had the same thing happen in the counterfeit. This one was a study done on half right and half wrong by Elder Jeff. And this one, and this one was a 6,000 word essay that was written by Pope Benedict at the time. By the time we get to 2019 in this movement, we have a split. We have the movement and FFA. And at this waymark, we see the first messenger comes out in open opposition at this point. And again, we see this counterfeited very similarly when Pope Benedict had participated. He co-wrote a book called From the Depths of Our Hearts. Among the Catholic people, there were two media sources which symbolised this split. We saw a battle between between NCR and EWTN. What triggered this event, this fight, was the REPAM event in the Vatican with some statues. When we look at our movement at this point in time, we looked very scattered and torn. And in the counterfeit, they also looked very scattered and torn. There was no unity. And based on all of this and knowing how close it is to each other, we can make predictions about what the next waymarks would be. Using the line of the end of ancient Israel, we knew that we would have an upper room experience here and be gathered. So we could predict that in 2021, the papacy movement would be gathered. We knew that we would be rising here as we have the Levites join us and the final cutting out of the mountain complete. So what we see is a rising of the papacy leading up to the Sunday Law by Mark. We expect to go and do a work in the world. And the papacy would also begin to do its work in the world. We would be a line of success using the model of failure, failure, success. And this is also their Omega history. They had failure, failure, and this is success. And everything from 1989 or 2001 to the Sunday Law is a work of preparing to do this work. And now we find ourselves here, just as the work is about to begin. So what kind of work is it? How does it fit in with what's happening in Protestant America? Is the papacy and elements of the United States colluding together? Is that one option? Or is Protestant America going to give homage to the papacy, and the papacy just is passive during this time and accepts the homage? Are they passive or active from Sunday Law forward? To look at this a little bit more, we're going to go to another study. We're going to look at the Third Dodoki War. We're going to look at the Babylonian War, which is part of that story. And see if we can learn what may be happening right now as we're going through this history. So I'm just going to move the camera now to the other board. We'll do a little bit of revision of the Third Dodoki War. Not looking at every element, because I want to focus on the relationship between the papacy and the United States. Another line that could be studied is World War I, which lines up with the Third Dodoki War. So we'll begin with this line and then we will start making some applications as we go. At this waymark, which we would line up with 1989, we have Antigonus fighting the King of the South with two allies, Python and Seleucus. We have application that Antigonus represents the United States. Python is representing the Mujahideen, which changes its name to the Taliban. And Seleucus represents the papacy. I won't prove the reasons behind that now, but you could go to the original study to learn this. This was taught in 2019 in Germany. So we have President Reagan, John Paul II, representing the papacy, and we have the Mujahideen working in Afghanistan. All working together to defeat the King of the South, but only one of these was physically fighting. John Paul II, papacy, was not fighting. The papacy was doing a different work at the time. After the Soviet Union fell, the relationship between John Paul II and America broke down. Over the Gulf War, John Paul II was very much against the United States doing that. He made public statements, but he was ignored by the United States and basically discarded as no longer useful to them. He became very angry about this and was known as the Angry Pope. What happens next in the Third Diadochi War that we mark on our line is that Antigonus kills Python because he's starting to act unilaterally and seeing his allies as a threat. When Python is killed, Seleucus can see what Antigonus is doing, and he goes to Egypt and he warns the who used to be the enemies, Lysimachus, Cassander, and Ptolemy, about what Antigonus is doing. Ptolemy. We line that way mark up with 2001, the war in Afghanistan and the overthrow of the Taliban. So what we see here is that the relationship between the papacy and the United States has completely broken down, and the papacy is now moved across to the King of the South and is working with the three allies. The relationship between the papacy and the United States breaks down and is never restored for the rest of this line. Because Seleucus never goes back to being Antigonus's ally for the rest of this history. They become competitors. In the next waymark, we have the three allies giving Antigonus an ultimatum. And we mark this as 2003, the invasion of Iraq. France, Germany, and Russia gave the United States an ultimatum. It's an ultimatum, but the United States ignored it. The next waymark, we have the Battle of Gaza. That place can also be called Raphia, but it's not the same Battle of Raphia that we find in Daniel 11. I mean, it's not the same battle. Yep. Okay. Antigonus has left the area and he left his son Demetrius in charge. Demetrius is not an experienced fighter. The King of the South approaches Demetrius's army, but the generals are discouraging Demetrius from fighting. They gave They were giving Demetrius good advice because he was too inexperienced to take on such a professional fighter as Ptolemy. And it was actually Seleucus working to encourage the King of the South to fight Demetrius and his army. This was 2019, what we know as the Battle of Raphia. It was a battle over the spheres of influence between the United States and Russia. We had a person in charge who was very inexperienced. That would be Donald Trump. The army generals told him not to withdraw his troops from Syria. Just as Demetrius ignored his generals, Trump also did the same. And just as Demetrius lost miserably, so did Trump. They lost many spheres of influence to Russia. This was a very happy year for Vladimir Putin. He was very celebrating a lot that year. He had won a lot of friends in Africa, South America, and elsewhere that year. And it seems prophetically that the papacy had some role in that. So I'm going to mark spheres of influence going to the King of the South. The next waymark is, on this line is the peace of the dynasts. And in 2021, that is when we see the King of the North and the King of the South fight again. This is not a hot war. This is an information war that comes before the fighting in Ukraine. In the Diadochi War, it's when Antigonus had come back to help and to support Demetrius. Antigonus was a good fighter. He successfully won this battle, and the fighting went all the way up to the borders of the King of the South. He probably could have invaded and conquered the King of the South, but he had two distractions that stopped him. Seleucus wants to retake his former territory of Babylon, and the Nabateans are also creating trouble. So this battle ends with a peace, a treaty, and doesn't actually go through and finish the job. In 2021, Putin was using information warfare in the lead up to the Ukraine war. The United States is just starting now to try fighting information warfare also. We have an experienced fighter come and run an information war campaign, which is highly successful against Russia. The warfare that the war that they do, it is over Russia's spheres of influence between the two countries. So America wins the hearts and minds of other countries. They don't go into Russia itself. Maybe if they had have kept going, they could have done more damage. You may recall that the Pandora Papers came out in 2021 as well. There's a lot of information in there that they have been using since as well, but there was much going on at that time. But they become distracted by the papacy. And the Nabateans are related, descendants of Ishmael. They represent Islamic groups. In 2021, we had the Taliban retake Afghanistan and all the chaos that ensued there, trying to evacuate people. And whatever the papacy was doing, I'm not aware of. But prophetically, they were doing something. So right now we are here, and we know that in the line we just looked at before, that there is a work that begins at Sunday Law for the papacy. And during this time period in the Diadochi War, this was a battle between Antigonus and Seleucus called the Babylonian War. Making application, we can see that it's the United States versus the papacy, and the papacy wins this battle like Seleucus did. So does this mean that the United States is going down and will no longer be a power? Not necessarily, and we'll look at why. The other question we may have had about them working together and colluding is clearly not correct, because we see the relationship is not friendly. So what does it mean for the papacy to win this battle? What would it look like? In the Diadochi War, we see that this is when the Seleucid dynasty is established. This lines up with our expectation that the papacy would be restructured, reformed, and ready for its work. And Seleucus was not passive, he was active after the Sunday Law. Once he's established, he begins to do his Eastern campaign. Out of that campaign, he's able to achieve for himself 500 war elephants. And what do elephants represent in our lines that we use? It represents information war. In this battle, Seleucus did not win Antigonus's territory. He won his own space. He carved out his own territory so he could do his own work. Antigonus lost the fight over Babylon, but he went home to the west. Where he remains a superpower and continues to fight on. So we can mark here that the papacy is conducting information warfare. The papacy has its own geographies where it's highly influential. So we expect to see work by the papacy in certain areas of the world. And the United States continues to do its work in its own areas. They don't work as one in unity. They're not friends. The United States is not simply creating a Sunday law and the papacy just sits back and rests and does nothing. That's not the case. The papacy has its own message, which is very similar to the true. At the very beginning of the line, we see the work of, we see the papacy and also the United States working. Here they're allies, but at the Sunday law they're not. We mark the deadly wound being healed at the Sunday law. When the deadly wound is healed, it is not the Protestantism combining church and state that is fulfillment of the deadly wound of the papacy. If the papacy is the mother and Protestantism is the daughters, and the mother is the one that received the deadly wound, when the deadly wound is healed, it is the mother's wound that is healed. So we'll continue in the next study, but I'll do a quick review. We began by looking at the idea of utopia and the different ideas people have about an ideal world we could live in. We know we moved from the right wing to the left wing, so we are closer to them. We know that there are problems in the left wing. They don't always understand sexism and racism, but they also don't understand the threat of the papacy. The reason the papacy is such a threat is because it so closely copies us. So the message will look very nice unless you look very closely. The purpose of the counterfeit work or the forgery is to steal those Nethinims that are God's people out of, to steal them from God, people that belong to God. And the fight between our movement and the counterfeit is a fight over God's people in the world. And we can also get caught up in these things as well. Priests, Levites, and Nethinims all need to be careful. We spend a little bit of time looking at how similar Satan has been counterfeiting our God's work. The same things are happening with them as is happening with us. As we are living it, they are also living the same. Sometimes we may feel that we are a small movement. We may sometimes feel that how can we be significant? But Satan doesn't think we're insignificant. Satan is copying our every move. Why would you copy something that was not going to do a great work? Because Satan knows it will be a line of success. So he's doing the same thing. And in all of this, we can see that the United States and Protestantism is doing a separate work to what the papacy is doing. It's not helpful to forget or ignore the work of the papacy. Because the very fact that it's so similar to us makes it extremely dangerous. If we're fighting over the Nethinims, in the next study, I want to look at the line of the Nethinims. As we compete with the counterfeit for the hearts and minds of Nethinims, what should we say to them? And what kind of utopias might they be hoping for? So if you'll kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Our God in heaven, I want to thank you for the prophetic message that we have. "34 years of work is given us precious truths that we need at this time. While we need to watch the news and be aware of events and to be horrified by sexism and other inequalities in the world, we need to beware not to fall into either the papal ditch or the Protestant ditch. It is only the prophetic lines which gives us such clarity on these things. So we want to praise you and thank you for leading this movement since 1989 until now. As we study the lines, it increases our faith. And we know that you will continue this work till the end. We would ask that you would breathe energy and desire into our hearts that we may study these things. Because this fight is of cosmic importance. So please help us to understand what a true utopia would look like as we continue for the rest of today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.